Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact the show at twitter.com/DW Groovecast and through Facebook at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a bucket. Ain't a bucket.
Mom! Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
We get straightened out?
Oh, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Next.
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah.
It's the holiday season, boop-dee-doo, and here we go. The Drummers Weekly Groovecast. Oh, hit that! Oh, what was that?
I'm entering a contest.
Don't jump ahead.
Oh man!
We have things to be thankful for.
That's true.
It's the Drummers Weekly Groovecast Thanksgiving edition, 2017 style.
Derp.
No, I thought that it would be cute, man, to do a little Thanksgiving, what we're thankful for. We got lots of good stuff. You know, we do so many shows that are these, you know, we're very serious about topics, and, you know, we have guests in and we talk very pedagogically, and we talk very much about their bio and their background. I thought, you know what? It's time to throw a little candy out there. Have a little fun.
Okay. I like candy.
Well, weren't we talking about the parent tax at one time?
Oh, yeah. Well, I kind of... I would not get elected with the percentage I took.
This is the Groovecast tax.
All right.
And you know what I was thinking about also, John, if we want to be really silly about this, this is our version of the end of a Bollywood film where everybody just like dances to a happy song and then everybody floats away in like a flying car. This is our version of that, because anytime they have a serious movie in Bollywood, they always kind of give you the happy ending with all the well,
wow.
Not exactly that.
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, but you know, they always have people. They always
I haven't experienced that movie.
They have a dance routine where they kind of congratulate you for going along the ride. That's what today's show is. We're going to have a little fun.
All right, if you say so.
But you know,
their happy ending. Right.
Here's what I want to do, though. In all seriousness, at the beginning of the show, I want to have a very serious and heartfelt thanks to all the listeners.
Amen. It's been so gratifying to realize that people are investing in us with their time, and I'd never envisioned that being the case, to be honest with you.
It's pretty unbelievable from sitting where we're sitting and thinking back approximately a year and a half ago when we were going, you know, this is just going to be one of these little goofy things, and we're going to have 62 listeners, and then we do a show and Mike Johnston says he listens to the podcast.
It's pretty awesome. I mean,
I know, it's very cool, isn't it?
Above and beyond all that too, just, you know, speaking with icons in a broad sense, you know, of the industry and all this drum related stuff, and how welcoming and encouraging they've been. That's just, I never even in a million years even thought that would be the case, and we've been really blessed.
Yeah, big thanks to the guests, man. They've been just tremendous,
incredible,
just wonderful. And you know, while we're at it, I want to say another big special thanks to our power listeners, the ones that check out every single show. And there's one thing in particular that I want to bring up that I think it's really funny and it's heartwarming as well, is that we've mentioned on the show before that we have a self-policing set of listeners. and it was once again evidenced to us again this past week. There was quite a long thread on a message board, quite a popular message board, that was in reference to the Bob Moses podcast. And listen, you know, we pride ourselves on having good audio quality, but there's just the occasional time that things get out from under your control that you just don't have any say so on. And there was just problems with that one, but and we were taken to task, shall we say, on one of the message boards. But here's where I'm coming from is it didn't take any more than an hour or two for the listeners to come right in and come to the rescue and say, you guys need to buck up that are complaining about the audio quality. Things happen and we like these guys, and therefore, you know, listen through and listen to what Bob had to say and blah, blah, blah. So thanks again to our listeners for doing the self-policing. We appreciate you guys out there.
Yeah, clearly, as fascinating as Bob was, you come on, man, we're going to be okay. You know, listen to what he's saying. His stories and his take on things were so amazing that it's archived now. Whether it's perfect or not, the content is really what we all should be focused on. And I thank some people who brought that point home. But, you know, it happens, man. That was, you know, and you had to go with it.
Had to, man.
That young man was going to be unavailable for quite some time.
Yeah, for those of you not aware, Bob was heading to Italy right after that. As a matter of fact, when we're recording this show, Bob's in Italy right now. So we had to strike while we could. And even if we waited until he got back, there was certainly no reassurance that the problems were going to be fixed, because we tried and tried several times to get it done and try to get it fixed, but just wasn't going to happen. It wasn't in the cards. And I think most people have realized that it was a listenable enough show from the audio quality. You could get through it. So we appreciate that. Right on.
Again, thanks for listening, everyone. It really is not taken for granted, and we appreciate it.
And one other thing that I think is absolutely hilarious that I want to bring into the picture and kind of tie it into something else. We really do appreciate you folks heading over to iTunes and leaving those reviews. We got one just over the last day or so that's one of the best, one of the funniest reviews that I've seen, but it hammers home one of the points that John and I have talked about from the get-go, and that is essentially, when you listen to this show, listen to it with an open mind, and then listen to several of them back to back. In other words, don't just give us a shot over several weeks. Don't just listen to us one time and then form a solid opinion, unless it's a good opinion. But give us a little bit of time. We will grow on you like some kind of a fungus. Yeah, because essentially the review read something like, when I first listened to these guys, it sounded like Lenny and Squiggy doing a drum podcast. Now I listen to them every week. I can't stop. So anyway, thanks for the reviews. And while we're in the reviews, let's go ahead and tie it into our most recent contest, our ongoing contest.
Woohoo!
Yeah. Thanks to our brother Chris Brady out at Aquarian Drumheads, we have a contest going, and it's in conjunction with the Mike Johnston show that was published recently. And when we decided we were going to do this show, Chris goes, "You're not doing this show without doing a giveaway. You guys all play Aquarian Drumheads, and so we're going to make this thing a big family affair." And I'm like, right on, brother. So here's the deal. Don't forget to head over to iTunes, go to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast homepage, and leave us a short written review. It's important that it's written because that's how we have your handle, like your iTunes handle, because we're going to put your handle into a hat and we are going to make a drawing happen sometime in the first few weeks of December. And the winners are going to receive some wonderful gifts from Aquarian Drumheads. First prize, you are going to get a complete set of batter heads of your choice from Aquarian Drumheads. And like we've mentioned on a previous podcast, don't take advantage of these guys, because Chris is such a good guy. And what I mean by that, you can't say, hey, I've got the Mike Portnoy drum set. I've got 23 batter heads I need to get. Let's try to limit this thing to like 6 to 8 drum heads, right? And also we want to limit our winners to contestants in the U.S. and in Canada. And it's just simply because I know we have listeners all over the globe. We do. But if we have a listener that wins that's in Tajikistan, it's going to cost Chris $285 to ship $100 worth of drum heads. So just, again, please keep that in mind. Second prize, you get a full set of Aquarian drum kit tools. And let me tell you, those are wonderful little tchotchkes to have. If you recall, one of the drum kit tools was one of my picks of the week. It's the kick drum kick patch. And so the other things that they have the snare drum tabs, they have the muffling T-tabs, and they also have the Duradots. Just go over to aquariandrumheads.com, start putting your wish list together for some drum heads, and then also take a look at those drum kit tools, and you'll be a happy camper. So go register for that, and we'll give you more details, and in particular, we'll give you the exact day that we're going to do that drawing live on Facebook. John, I've been talking the whole time, man.
You know what you're talking about.
Well, let's get into our topic for the day. We'll get
that was
into
a good nap. I'll know that much.
That's what all the listeners are saying also. Hey. That was a good nap.
Woo.
Let's talk about our topic for the day. And our topic for the day is our little fun candy. And it's stuff drummers do. S-T. Yeah.
Drummers do.
It's stuff that we do better than anybody else.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, or at least put it to you this way: it's stuff that we do to more of a degree than any other musician.
That could be true as well.
So I thought that we'd have a little fun with this, and please don't mistake this that we're bagging on everybody, because there's some really cool stuff in there too.
We'll have some positives.
Yeah, we're absolutely going to have positives, but we're gonna poke a little bit of fun at drummers also. And one of the first things I want to bring up, John, I like to call it practice shortcuts, or the proverbial magic bullets that we think that we have.
Like Hollywood diets and weird saran wrap belts for your belly.
This is the Suzanne Summers practice routine. I love it, man, when students come to me and there will be some kind of very basic thing that we're working on, say the single stroke roll.
Oh, that.
Well, first off, let me say this. There's a huge difference between something being simple and something being easy. There's nothing more simple than a single stroke roll, but it ain't easy.
No.
So get that in your mind. And I love it when students will come in after like 1 week and they'll go, I just can't get this single stroke roll. Do you have some shortcuts?
That's a good one.
No, there's not. You have to practice there, Chub.
Use your feet. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, some of the ones that I think is absolutely just precious. I love it when students will come in with something like weighted sticks. It's like the proverbial.
They're on deck, man.
Yeah, it's like the proverbial donut, a couple donuts on a baseball bat. Or maybe even like picking up 3 or 4 bats and swinging them. And I love it when they'll come in and they'll go, how's this, man? Or better yet, there's a couple of companies that actually make little weights, little like beanbag things that go on sticks.
Velcro strap on the stick.
Yeah. Isn't that charming?
They're not a sponsor, so I'm going to say no.
Well, again, like I said, it's fun. We're having fun. If it works for you, go for it, man. But it's along the same lines also of there's been a couple of like practice pads that basically are like playing into a mud puddle. Some of those also, I love that whole thing of like, well, yeah, now I've got to make every single stroke with my wrist. No more bounce. Well, do you ever play on a drum that has zero bounce? Even an 18-inch floor tom sends a stick back to you, brother.
That's a fine point.
Not
very realistic to play on gum.
Yeah, right. And it's the same concept also. Dennis Chambers played into pillows, so I mean it's hard to bag on him, but I mean I have students come in all the time and go, would it help if I played on pillows? I'd say, well, yeah, if that's part of your drum set.
That's funny.
Mike Johnson.
There's been many a gig I wish I had a pillow in my drum set.
Mike Johnson and I, we were talking a little bit about it. At one point, we were talking about practicing, and I asked him about, did he have a preference of, having students practice rudimental stuff on pads versus a snare drum, and he and I had the exact same thought. And it's like, well, sure, if you've got the choice, you want to practice on a drum because, I mean, that's what you're actually applying it for. Yeah, I always think that's funny, man, that we think that it's a magic bullet by, or like a practice shortcut by doing anything that we possibly can aside from practicing on the actual instrument that we're going to perform on.
I like to practice my jazz ride patterns on the sidewalk.
It helps with that natural rebound.
Exactly. That's a little secret for all you drummers out there.
Well, and it kind of leads us into that thing also, that there's something about us as drummers also that it kind of falls into that category of like, we don't play a specific pitched instrument. Right. Unless we have our other drummer percussionists that do play like keyboard instruments. But when we play on drums, snare drum, drum set, it's a non-specified pitch instrument. So we get away with a lot of crap that other instrumentalists don't get away with from a standpoint of like chops-based, practice-based stuff. Because, we have even dedicated contests and stuff that lean in toward that thing and that are highly dependent upon it.
Someone built a device to measure the focus of said contests even. That's mind-blowing.
What do you do with your drumometer, John? The two or three that you have?
It broke a long time ago when it was drowned in my tears. So I don't do anything with it.
Don't even lie to me and tell me that you haven't bought a few of those and resold them.
I never have.
No way.
I never have. I don't know if I want to touch one. That's maybe why I haven't purchased it.
Well, one of the things that I was getting at is that we have these little contests that come up from time to time. It could even be like the Guitar Center drum offs or the world's fastest drummer, world's fastest feet, world's fastest whatever, that kind of thing. And the thing that I always like to talk about is that, can you imagine how ridiculous it would be to have like a world's fastest saxophone player? And
there's plenty of guys buying for that.
Right. And the whole thing is like, let's take, for example, a single stroke roll. That's one of the contests. That's one of the subcategories, right? Where we have a guy just sit and play a single stroke roll for say like a minute and how many strokes he can get in there. Could you imagine having like a tenor saxophone player walk up to a microphone and just jackhammer a B flat for 1 minute? How many times can he play an articulated B flat, flutter tongued?
Or like, B flat major scale, go.
Right, yeah. You can't get away with that on a pitched instrument. It just sounds ridiculous.
Trumpet players, like, how many high triple G's can you play in a row? At what speed?
Oh, we are guilty of speed for speed's sake.
Speed. I am so glad I have none. I don't have to worry about those contests coming up.
John, after this thing is over, for part of our thanks, we're going to sit down and we're going to put 1 minute of paradiddles at the end of this show. Just hit the button, hit record, me and you on practice pads, paradiddles.
I'd rather it be like, how many turkey drumsticks can I eat in an hour? That sounds more attractive to me.
If we Facebook Live that thing,
that would be pretty horrific.
It'd be awesome, man. That's what it would be.
How did that little dude put that in there? Wait.
John, you mentioned something also before we started, that drummers are probably better at this than almost anybody else. And it's like gear trends. Whew. Man, those things.
Sometimes I embrace that because I make money, like finding things that guys got to have. But man, we are bad about that.
I'm telling you, man, there are entire like decades of gear that has fallen on the island of misfit toys.
I'm curious if they'll come back.
Oh, they will. I mean, I feel sure they will.
Square toms, I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, that's true. What about 13-inch KZ hats?
Man, maybe.
Those clunky 20-inch brilliant finish K-Custom rides, man.
All it takes is some hot shot to reintroduce it.
Did you ever play one of those that sounded good?
I don't think so.
I know I didn't, man. There's one that's in a teaching studio at one location that I teach at, that it is it's one of the worst sounding cymbals I've ever heard in my life. I'm just going to throw that out there.
As a matter of fact, I have actually played the most famous one.
Oh, you didn't
really like it.
Yeah.
So it's just not my thing.
Yeah.
And any cymbal that shows how bad my technique is, I'm not a big fan of. I need a lot of wash.
Yeah.
A little less definition.
Well, it's funny. We're kind of talking about 80s sort of trappings, but there are also some. But
that's when it really, really became.
It became a thing.
The epidemic that it now is forever evolving. The 80s was when like the companies did the power tom thing and really pushed them, and everybody had to have them. And
the whippersnappers now, man, have outsmarted themselves though, from a standpoint they've gone into that realm to where they've made life hard on themselves as far as like carrying gear around and even acquiring certain things. I mean, man, dudes are playing 26-inch bass drums and 15-inch rack toms, 18-inch floor toms. It's hard to even get heads for those, much less carrying around a 26-inch ultra thin super dark ride. Where do you even get a case for that, man?
I'm not really going to waste my time worrying about it.
18-inch hi-hats.
Yeah, man. That'll keep your church gig.
You smell what I'm stepping in, don't you?
You don't worry, but you won't get fired from the church if you got 18-inch hi-hats. Got your finger on the pulse, baby.
In some degrees, the metal snare drum for a while, man, got a bad name. You had to have a wood drum. I don't know what that was all about, man.
I never paid attention to that trend.
It was one of those things. It was like a wood snare drum just for the sake of having a wood snare drum.
Mm.
Isn't that weird? But I don't know, man. That is one of those weird things where for some reason we seem to fall as much prey to that as any other instrument.
Fortunately, most of us are smart enough to know that returning to a Ludwig metal snare drum of some sort is inevitable and smart.
Absolutely.
And I have a lot of wood drums I really love, so I don't want that to be misconstrued as they're worthless.
Oh, no, they're not worthless, because I've got some good ones too. But boy, I tell you, there's seldom a time, man, that I can't find an appropriate use for, like you said, one of those Ludwig metal snare drums, whether it be a chrome over brass Black Beauty or just a plain old metal Superphonic.
Mm.
It's hard to go wrong. There's, like I said, there's almost a use inside of any style for one of those drums.
No doubt.
Well,
Superphonic's been used in every musical setting
Yeah.
and delivered. Good job, Ludwig. Now let's not talk about the late 70s on. Ludwig.
Well, in case you thought we were bagging on everybody, we are going to talk also about some really super cool things that we do better than anybody else. And one thing is virtually what we're doing right now. It's the camaraderie aspect.
I've said it before. I'll say it again. A fraternity second to none. I cannot overstate how meaningful my relationships are with a lot of really cool people who happen to be drummers. And there is not a group that you could count on any more than that, from a shoulder to cry on to gear to borrow to encouragement. It's unbelievable. You know, I don't see that a lot in other groups of players in their respective instruments like I do with drums. And man, that's something that my friends know I don't take for granted. I love that.
Man, we do the drum hang, drum lunch, after gig drum drinks better than anybody else.
No question.
I mean, there are entire conferences dedicated to it. As a matter of fact, I think right now, John, while we were recording this, Percussive Arts Society International Convention is happening.
Most certainly is.
And I mean, every shape and form of drummer and percussionist all get together there. So, I mean, you have everything from your suit and tie pedagogue all the way down to hardened rockers, man.
Mm-hmm. Hanging out.
Hanging out.
Have you been to one?
I've been to many. It's a good hang, man. It really is.
Let me ask you something.
What?
Do you have to play 3 rudiments to get in?
5.
So it's really true.
Yeah, and you got to play them all at least up to 180 BPM.
Guess what I've never done?
Rudiments.
And?
Practice.
And?
Go to a PASIC.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I think I always... 5. I'm kind of glad, because I thought that guy was lying to me about 3 just so I wouldn't embarrass everyone and show up.
Listen, we need to take this show on the road to a PASIC.
That would be all right. I'll go look around the city.
We could get that.
I'll be a tourist.
We could co-brand it as like the official podcast of the Percussive Arts Society.
Now, come on.
Well,
they probably already have one.
Shh.
This isn't a new trend, Phil.
But no, we do that. We do that really well. And you know, another thing, when we're talking about gear, we do a good thing also. We are very fraternal from the standpoint of sharing gear.
Absolutely.
You and I, man, have done that numerous times, as well as our other friends.
Much appreciated, and I'll give anything I have to anyone that I know, trust, and love, because that's what we do.
Well, and if you want an absolute exemplary example of that, it's what we're going to do at the very end of this show, and I'll leave everybody hanging on that here for a little while. But we're going to have a little bit of fun at the end. So at the end, where we're going to do something that we've never done before. But before we do that, John, let's go into our segment for the week.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's been a little while since we've done one of these, but I thought it would be cool to do a great drum track. And so we'll go ahead and get started with that. John, why don't you go first today and tell us what you got?
I would love to. I got really, really into a band called The Tubes when I was in late high school, early enrolled in college days, we'll call it. And just really took to the drummer in that band, Prairie Prince. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the majority of it's just a real straightforward rock. And he was a good ballad player, too. They had a couple ballads. One was a relatively decent hit, and just a great musical drummer. And they came out with a record called Outside, Inside, Inside, Outside. I don't remember. I remember it was white, so my memory's not completely shot.
You got a 50-50 shot if you're a listener of finding that record.
Well, in any event, there was a track on there called "Tip of My Tongue" that I was just smitten with, and it was a different side of Prairie, and that it was a really funky tune, and funky enough even that the Earth, Wind, and Fire horns were on it, and it's just beautiful, like no pun intended, tongue in cheek, tube stuff. Fee Bill's clever little, take on things and subtle little hints and what have you. But it's a great track and just really, really groovy. It's not anything special by way of technique or drums, but just shows a side of a drummer I really liked that, I kind of was familiar with his real straightforward rock playing, and, he's done some other stuff, Chris Isaac, some vibier records like that. He's a real good player, amazing artist. But it's just a track that came to my mind that a lot of people either aren't aware of or forgot about, that is awesome, and you should go check it out and have fun listening to it.
Nice, man.
Yeah, man.
It's one of those things also to where it's a little surprising that the Tubes haven't been brought up before.
Yeah, that's true, especially considering how much I like that band. I've seen them live a few times, and that's a real circus.
Yeah, they're one of those groups that did have a little bit of mainstream popularity, but boy, they are revered by the musicians community.
Yeah, and everyone in that band is extremely talented and great players on their own, just as players, and they had that. They kind of, to me, they were always kind of like a psychedelic band with a really great sense of humor.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, they could just do a button-down, straight-up pop ballad, which was awesome in and of itself too. But a lot of fun, like live. That band would be. I remember that tour. They had horns, and they had these dancers. They always had these dancers that were scantily clad and running around that. But these dancers had these gigantic stuffed saxophones with a tongue hanging out, and on tip of my tongue, they're just licking Fee up and down, of course, and he's playing it up like, yes, this is awesome and all that. But the whole insane spectacle that is that show, I wish they were still like kind of doing that, because it is a whole lot of fun.
John, I hope...
And Prairie's back there owning it the whole time. A monster player.
I hope you realize that you just brought the show full circle with the saxophone with the tongues hanging out, and then again with our beginning where we were talking about a happy ending.
Oh, my God. I'm sure my massage therapist wife's going to love this.
She listens to the show.
I know. She calls me out regularly.
My pick for the week. Talk about rip roarers and good bands and good players. We could probably do a segment on this guy as like just a totally underrated drummer. And I think his name has been mentioned on the show before a couple times. But my drummer and my drum track is from the wonderful Herlin Riley, the New Orleans-based voodoo guru. And the track is from a 1990 recording by pianist Marcus Roberts. And the tune is called Deep in the Shed. And that's also the title of the album. Mm-hmm. So it's the title track to the album, Deep in the Shed. And it is one of the most unique grooves that I think I've ever heard. And it has just got New Orleans voodoo written all over it. It's we'll call it a Latin tune. It does go to swing at times throughout. But it's just a really cool, funky Latin groove that Herlin plays between multiple cowbells and the rest of the drums.
Man, I remember that record got a ton of press.
Yeah. And
that ended up being the reason I bought it. And that was the first time I really got hip to Herlin. And, what's interesting about him, a lot of New Orleans drummers, and I love this about them, there's this kind of fuzzy grittiness to their whole sound and playing all that. And his is a little cleaner.
Yes.
But still just so deeply rooted in the feel and the tradition and all that. And it's like, in some ways you can hear Hurlin and kind of get a little clearer picture of New Orleans drumming, like his sound and his touch are just it's just a little bit cleaner, I guess is a way to put it. Does that make sense?
Hurlin's got insane chops. And, here I am, I'm going to double dip into like tracks. But the first time I got hip to him was prior to getting on board with the Marsalis clan, down in New Orleans where he's from. He was also the drummer for Ahmad Jamal.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, man.
Well, that's where he got his education.
You need to check out some of those Ahmad Jamal albums from the early 80s, early to mid 80s, where talk about technique and chops and musicality, and then just that plain old New Orleans grit and dirt and funk. He is the exemplary drummer for that, man. I mean, it's just incredible, man. He's the shining beacon of all those things wrapped together in a great package. So,
man, you talk about a fraternity. I wouldn't mind being in that New Orleans drumming fraternity.
Road trip, son.
I cannot. I've said it before. I don't know if I can think of a drummer from New Orleans I don't like.
Well, between you and I also, we personally know a dozen or more of those guys down there too. So
such incredible players.
Yeah, really good players. So that's my track. My track is Deep in the Shed from the Marcus Roberts album, Deep in the Shed, Hurlin Riley playing drums.
Fine choice, sir.
Thank you.
Fine choice.
Now, John, we teased a few minutes earlier that we had something really cool coming up at the end of the show, and it was tied into this drummers fraternity thing.
Mm-hmm.
And here again is a shining example of that. When we, again, started doing this show a little over a year ago, we had no idea that it was going to become the success that it has become, and it was going to have the far reach that it has. But I'm going to go ahead and say right now that this is the first baby of the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. And what I mean by that is we have our first offshoot, our first spinoff, our first podcast that was birthed from the inspiration of the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. And what we want to do today is we want to welcome a guest onto this show and allow him to tell you what he's been up to, what he's doing, and also tell you a little bit about his new podcast. And our guest is the drummer Dan Radin, and his show is called the Drum Showroom Podcast. And so we thought we would bring him on, let him tell you about his journey, and let him explain his decision to start a podcast. And it's very different, John. It's really different than anything anybody's doing. And we're going to be guests on his show, which is very cool as well. And so we thought we would just kind of let him come on and tell everybody what he's been up to and what he's doing and where you can listen to his show.
All right. Let's do it.
Dan Radin, welcome to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast, brother. It's a pleasure having you on the show.
Phil and John, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor and a pleasure to be asked to join you.
Man, let me tell you, John came to me, it was several weeks ago, and he said, I had just heard something really cool. And I was like, well, what's going on? He goes, listen, there's a listener of ours and a friend of mine that is changing his life. And I'm like, wow, that's super cool. And he goes, well, listen, he is starting his own podcast that's a completely different concept than anyone else is doing. And part of it was inspiration from our show, which first, Dan, let me say, we're flattered beyond belief. And John said, listen, this guy's doing something different where he's doing chiefly a gear-based show, and he wants us to be on his show. And I thought, well, shoot, man, if that's going to be the case, and why not have you on our show? Because like I mentioned to John after he said all that, this is our first podcast baby. And again, we're we're beyond flattered, Dan, that you've decided to do a show. And likewise, like I said, we want to welcome you to the show, and we want you to tell all of our listeners what you're up to and tell us a little bit about your show, because I will guarantee you this. The Groovecast Nation will be incredibly interested in hearing what you got going on. So, Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself, buddy.
Well, thank you, Phil. Thank you, John. What an amazing introduction. Think of me as your first spinoff, you know? Even though I wasn't a character on the sitcom that is Drummers Weekly Groovecast, I was very much inspired by the work that you guys do. So to introduce myself, I'm a drummer. I've been playing for over 20 years. Going back to when I first started playing a musical instrument, I was a trumpet player in 4th grade in Waterford, Connecticut. And I was always peering back in band at those cool drummers in the back row and all that cool stuff they had to play with. And I kept going to my parents and saying, I really think I want to switch to playing the drums when I get to 6th grade, which was the age that you were allowed to play drums in my town. And they kind of said, well, we don't know. It's kind of expensive. It's a lot of stuff. Not sure if you're the right fit for drums, which I think translated to, we don't want to have drums in our house. So we finally made a deal, and it was that if I was able to get all A's on a report card, I could take a drum lesson. So I finally got all A's on a report card, and I took my first drum lesson with a guy named George Holmes, who had every size of red sparkle Slingerland drum ever made. And I fell in love. From that first drum lesson, I never looked back. It was the gear, it was the playing, it was the role in the band, it was the sounds. I just fell in love, and I spent all of high school doing everything musical. You know, every guest that you have has the same story as me. I played in jazz band, I played in the orchestra, I played in the concert band, played in my own bands, all that kind of stuff. But that was how I defined myself as a young adult or old child. I was Dan the drummer. And I went off to school. I went to Rutgers University. I thought I was going to be a music teacher. I was greatly influenced by my band director, who was also a percussionist in high school. And I went off to school, thought I was going to be a music teacher, got to the student teaching portion of the degree, which is the last thing you do, and said, I just don't think I can do this for the next 50 years. And at the same time, I'd been working part-time at Sam Ash music stores, selling first keyboards and software and recording equipment, and then later a position opened up. I moved over to the drum department at Sam Ash and was great at it. And knew that what I loved about selling gear was the gear. I loved helping people find the right solution. It wasn't so much about selling as it was solving their problems with equipment. And I just didn't quite trust myself that I could make a career in drums, and spent really the last 15 years building a career outside of drums, but touching music. I started my career at Sennheiser, did some marketing, did some product management, was the product manager for Neumann high-end microphones for a little while, got a feel for what it's like to spend a lot of time in a studio. Then went on and was a product manager for Alesis and got them into electronic drums, really had my first drum products. Moved over, did some consumer electronic stuff, worked for a gaming headset manufacturer, and most recently spent a few years at a big company called Harman, which is the company that owns JBL, AKG, and about 35 other brands. Harman was itself most recently acquired by Samsung, so it's a huge company now, and I had always felt more comfortable with smaller companies, but after its acquisition by Samsung, it was a huge place, and I was just feeling like it was time for me to do something of my own, and it was time for me to come back to drums, because that's where my heart is, that's where my passion is. So I set out to figure out what the right way to express my love of drums, drummers, and drum gear would be. And I started thinking about multiple pillars, a little bit of retail e-commerce, a little bit of tech, given my background in technology products and product marketing, a little bit of storytelling, because one of the things that I think I enjoyed the most during my corporate career was I spent 3 years at Alesis, which is part of a group of companies, including Newmark and Akai, as their copywriter. So what that means is I wrote all their web pages, all their press releases, their box copy. I briefed engineering, I briefed creative, anything that had words on it that needed to communicate something that one group had had an idea about in a way that another group needed to understand, whether it was customers, whether it was engineers, whether it was marketers. That job made me a much better communicator and made me really enjoy the idea of telling a story, translating an idea from one point to another. And that's really what brought me to podcasting. I started listening to Drummers Weekly Groovecast about a year ago. Loved that you guys, two working drummers, get together and kind of recreate that old drum shop hang, that feel of I'm in a drum shop, it's Sunday morning, and we're just going to talk about drums and drum gear and drumming and drummers and music that's been made on the drums. I loved that. You guys have done a couple of shows that are gear focused. You most recently had a hi-hat show. You've done a ride cymbal show, a snare drum show. They're great. And it gave me the idea that maybe one of the things that would be authentic to me and my journey would be focusing specifically on drum gear. So I've started a podcast. I've done 8 episodes so far. It's called Drum Showroom. It's the world's first drum podcast focused on gear. And each episode we talk with a guest, whether it's a drummer, a drum gear developer, designer, manufacturer, a record producer, a bass player, another instrumentalist, somebody tangentially related to drums and drumming, and talk about the gear and how it influences the way that they play, the way they design products, the way that they play with drummers if they're not a drummer, or the way that drum gear influences the way they produce records. So each episode is a unique perspective on the role that drum gear has to play and the stories behind each piece of gear. So it's going really well so far. I've got a number of amazing guests lined up for the future. I think we've already interviewed a number of really fun guests, and I would definitely encourage anyone who listens to Drummers Weekly Groovecast to consider adding Drum Showroom to their subscriptions list as a companion piece.
I agree as well. And Dan, I don't think it's an understatement when I say that the amount of thought you've put into creating your show is about 10,000 times greater than that of what John and I
That's put in. Low. That's low.
25,000 times. So yeah, you're quite the organized fellow, man, and that's one of the reasons that we love the concept of your show, because I mean it's one of those things that it's a show that no one has thought to do yet. And so we greatly appreciate that. And then I'm sure that most folks can find you in the normal places where podcasts are found. So if you'd like to tell everybody if there's any other places that they can find you, like social media as well, that would be great. And also, how often is the show published?
Absolutely. So the show lives on SoundCloud, so soundcloud.com/drum showroom, but you can get it, as you said, Phil, any of the common podcast syndication methods. So you can get it on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play Podcasts, Stitcher, and then SoundCloud, as I mentioned, all under Drum Showroom. Social media includes Facebook.com/Drum Showroom. Twitter handle is Drum Showroom, and the most active medium is Instagram, which again is Drum Showroom. A lot of interaction with guests and fans, and I think that's the community that I've found the most engagement with so far.
Gotcha. And do you have a set publishing schedule? Do you I know our show comes out every Monday.
Yeah, I've been trying to emulate you guys and get a little more regular, but so far with moving from Connecticut to North Carolina and trying to get a business started at the same time, it hasn't been as regular as you guys, but I try to publish at least one episode per week. It isn't a set day so far, but maybe I can take a page out of your playbook and set a typical publishing day, but minimally I like to release at least one episode a week and preferably 2 if possible.
Gotcha. I can tell you this from or if you would like to call us the wise old sages of podcasting, that it's interesting that we have trained our listeners, I guess you might say that. We have trained them that once the podcast goes live, by the time I can refresh the page from it being uploaded, there are already the downloads starting. And so I'm sure it's kind of one of those things that a lot of folks just realize that this is roughly when this guy uploads this. But it's very cool that because we joke around, we say we have power listeners. We absolutely do have power listeners. We have folks that never miss a show, and even to the point to where as soon as the show goes live, man, that sucker's being downloaded. So that would be a little suggestion for you there, brother.
Awesome. Thank you. I mean, as I've said from the beginning, I am not good at this, and I'm getting better. I think that if you listen to my first episode, the degree of improvement to the second and third episode to where I am today, I'm still an amateur podcaster, but the more that you can talk to other people who do this, the more you can learn. So I'm absolutely open to learning from you wise old sages and getting better, and also sharing the process of getting better with the listeners. I think that we're in a time with media where podcasting's been around for a few years, but it's really started to go mainstream more recently, around the time that Drummers Weekly Groovecast was launched. I wonder if there's some relationship there.
Oh, well, who knows? We as John and I like to say, we break the fourth wall consistently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's more let's watch the train wreck.
Well, there's
people are waiting for me to just melt down or something.
Waiting? You mean again? Waiting again for one of us to melt down?
No, it's way more credit than I deserve.
But my point is, I think that this medium is starting to mature, and we're starting to build standards and concepts that are universal across podcasts. And I'm not afraid of showing my warts. I'm not afraid of showing my scars if it helps me create content that people like, or it spurs people to give me feedback to improve. So I love that you gave me some suggestions, and I always encourage listeners to tell me, what can I do better? Do you have ideas for shows? Do you have suggestions how I can do better? Do you want it longer, shorter, more often, less often? All of that is helpful to me, I think.
Well, I know that John and I both feel that some of our best shows and best suggestions have come from listeners that would say, hey guys, I like what you're doing, but hey, how about this? Why don't you try that? And then something else that's really hard for me to accept, but I'm getting better at doing it, is not every show can be a home run. You know what I mean? You get out there and you do your best. You stumble over words from time to time. You have problems putting sentences together. You have problems putting cogent ideas together.
I'm sitting right here, man.
Hey, man, it's all good.
You said talk about me right in front of me like I'm a dog?
Or an Eeyore.
Golly.
But it's one of those things that really is the charm, Dan, because you and I and John have all talked about part of the allure of doing these kind of shows also is the vulnerability behind it. And one of the things that we tell all of our guests that we have on the show is, hey, look, don't come too prepared. Right? In other words, you want to be able to have a conversation like you said, Dan, where you're like hanging out by the counter at the drum shop and you're just talking about real life stuff, because that's what people really want to hear. People can tell the sincerity, in the voices and in the conversation. So I think that's really important. But yeah, John and I are coming up on 100 episodes, and the warts and hairs are there, brother. Believe me. Yeah.
Well, I think that one of the things that I love and am inspired so much by your show is the sincerity, the authenticity, that you guys are who you are. You're not playing a role. You're not wearing a mask. This is really who you guys are, and that helps you be relatable. And I think, again, I talk about how you guys inspired me, but aside from just starting the show, you inspired me to be authentic to who I am in my career as well. I think that I started my career to get closer to drum gear. That's why I got into business. And I thought as a 18 or 19-year-old, I'm going to start a drum company, and that's what I'm going to do when I grow up. And the reality was that it just wasn't a good time. I don't think the market was really in the place where it needed more drum companies when I was 18, 19, 20. So I started a career in things that were adjacent. I started with microphones, and then I moved to electronic drums, and those things were kind of right next to what I love, which is the acoustic drum set. But then I started to move a little further out, things that were a little bit further adjacent to drums. So things like headphones and gaming headsets went a little further away, and then came back to consumer electronics, and I was doing some sport headphones. And in the end, I needed to, I felt like I was getting further and further away from who I was authentically. And now for the first time coming back to working around drum gear all day, all the time, I feel this sense of relief that I am being who I am, that I am utilizing the gift and the natural person that I am by embracing this. I mean, I'm not going to get rich working on drum gear all day. I think that there are lots of stories of people starting companies, starting stores that make a good living, that are happy in what they do, but I have no delusions of grandeur that I'm going to be a billionaire drum manufacturer or drum retailer. But I do think that I've had some varied experiences being outside but near drums that I'd like to be able to bring some of the ideas and things that I've learned about back to the drum industry so that I can hopefully inject some new energy, some new ideas, and help move the industry forward.
Well, I'll say this. I've known Dan a long time, and I know besides your experiences and your knowledge, you're going to bring a ton of people in that have plenty of that too. And that's something that I know our listeners will love. So, keep your ear to the ground with this show, because there's going to be a number of really, really great people with so much great information coming at you.
Well, and one thing I want to add on to that too, Dan, is I want to assuage your fears from the standpoint of not getting rich working on drums, because this podcast business, sir, you will just back that Brinks truck right up to your front door and just dump the piles of cash on there like John and I have been experiencing. Right, John?
Yeah.
Hey, Dan, before I forget also, do you have a website for the show? I don't know if I heard that.
Good question. So I do own the domain drumshowroom.com. I am not a web designer, so currently drumshowroom.com redirects to the SoundCloud page for the show. So if you type in drumshowroom.com, it'll take you to the podcast. In the future, as my business starts to get more mature, I'm sure I will separate it, redirect it out. But for right now, the podcast is the most mature of the things I've been able to do in the months since I left my corporate job. So that's where I'm focusing right now.
Brother, you literally are following in our footsteps. It's almost the exact same scenario with our domain as well. Although we've been promising our listeners for the past 6 months that site's going to get up and going.
The 4 people that want it.
but yeah, we're kind of in the same bag. And then, Dan, aside from social media, do you have a dedicated email address that the folks can get in touch with you?
Yes. So dan@drumshowroom.com is a great way to get in touch with me. That's dan@drumshowroom.com. Also, there's an email link off of my show page. And I don't know if this is a little bit out of turn, but I've also created a Patreon page. So years ago in the arts, there was this concept of patronage. So wealthy donors would support artists to be able to create things. So it wasn't so much focused on artists and creators needing to make things maximally commercializable. So there's this website called Patreon that enables people who create things to offer the ability for people who like what they do to support them. So if you like what I do, check out patreon.com/drumshowroom. That's patreon.com/drumshowroom, and you can get access to some exclusive content. I create a little quick tips and tricks episode that is only accessible by Patreon subscribers in between each episode of the show, which is free to everyone. So if you can support, I would appreciate it. If you can't, the show is free, and I'm happy to share what I know, what I learn with everybody at no charge.
John, do you feel like we should be getting some VIG off that Patreon?
I'd like to just win the lottery.
Well,
I don't have time for that. Dan's organized, man. I need to walk in the gas station and walk out.
Let the chips fall where they may.
Amen.
Bet it all on black, right?
Help him out, guys.
That's right. So, guys,
it'll be worth it.
Once again, this is Dan Radin with the Drum Showroom Podcast. You can find it on SoundCloud. You can find it basically anywhere that you find your own podcast. He's a great guy. He's got a great concept. pushed all of his chips onto the drumming table. So like all good drummers and all good musicians, let's help this guy out. Let's support him in all of his endeavors. Dan, man, thank you so much, man. It is, again, it's a complete and total honor for you to use us as inspiration to move forward on, in your life and with this podcast, man. And we will absolutely encourage our listeners to patronize you.
Guys, thank you so much. Thank you for the inspiration. Thank you for what you do. Thanks for having me on the show, and I really look forward to hopefully coming back and giving everybody an update on what I'm doing outside of the podcast really soon. I've got some things in the works that I think will be really exciting to drum gear nerds like myself, and really look forward to sharing that when it's ready.
You bet, buddy. We look forward to an ongoing relationship, man.
Outstanding. And maybe you guys come up to Asheville, we can have a drum hang, or I can come down to Atlanta, come see you guys face to face, and we can talk about Gretsch for hours and hours.
Sounds good, buddy. We'll take you up on it.
Outstanding.
All right, Dan, take care, man.
Talk to you soon, bud.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. We greatly appreciate your support. And also big thanks to Dan Radin for coming on to the show. And much, much success we wish upon him and his new ventures in life, and especially for his new podcast, The Drum Showroom. So everyone, go on over, give a listen. He posted the show with yours truly and John a little over a week or so ago. So please go over and give a listen, not only to our show, but all of his other shows in his back catalog. All right, now before we get out of here, let's go ahead and reiterate one more time our contest we have in conjunction with Aquarian Drumheads. Register today. All you have to do is go over to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast homepage inside of iTunes and leave us a short written review. That's right, it has to be written, so we have your iTunes handle. We take that handle, put it into a hat sometime in early to mid-December, and we draw 2 lucky winners. The first prize winner is going to win their choice of batter heads from Aquarian Drumheads. Second prize, you're going to win a full set of Aquarian drum set tools. Go over to aquariandrumheads.com. That way you can take a look and see what you want to get for your drum heads, and you can get a look at all those drum kit tools as well. As always, you can find us. We're on SoundCloud. That's our homepage where we host all of the shows. You can also find us at all the regular places that you listen to podcasts: iTunes, Google Play Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean. Pretty much everywhere you listen to your favorites, you can find us as well. If you can't find us, please reach out to us. You can email us. We're at drummersweeklygroovecast@gmail.com. You can also interact with us on social media. We're at facebook.com/drummersweeklygroovecast and at twitter.com/DWGroovecast. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, from Phil and John here at DWG. New shows come out every single Monday. Subscribe today, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.